Number 10, Forgive Me Please. This equipment triggers all of your on-kill effects every second for 8 seconds. Now I need to clarify, this is not necessarily a bad equipment. It certainly has a lot of potential, possibly the most potential of any equipment in the entire game. This equipment is the king of item synergies. There are so many items that work with it. You can make incredibly powerful area of effect builds with Gasoline and Will-O-Wisps. You can get healing from Monster Teeth and Interstellar Death Plants. You can charge up Resonance Disc and Frost Relic. You can even use it to spawn lunar coins on the buttons on Abandoned Aqueduct. That last one is one of my favorite interactions in the entire game. It's next level, just the way all of these intricate systems can interact to do something so unintentionally beautiful. It's why I love this game. But the strongest synergy is with Soulbound Catalyst. This item lowers your equipment cooldown whenever you kill an enemy, so when combined with an equipment that constantly activates your on-kill effect, it essentially creates a feedback loop where you're constantly recharging the equipment from the equipment. And this is only scratching the surface of what this little tyke can do. So after hearing all of that, it might be surprising that I decided to put this on the worst equipment list. As much as it pains me to put it here, I have to acknowledge it's borderline useless in a lot of runs. The longer I've played this game, the more I've realized just how much item capital this equipment requires. If you're just playing normally, going through the first 5 stages and fighting Mithrix, the vast majority of the time, this equipment won't do very much for you. Looping is a different story. The longer you go, the better this equipment becomes, but it's definitely not something you can just pick up and use at any point in the run. Much like my relationship with my nephew, when it's good, but when it's bad, it results in a class 5 misdemeanor. At number 9, Ocular HUD. This equipment gives you a 100% critical strike chance for 8 seconds on a 60-second cooldown. Again, like most of the equipment on this list, it definitely has its use cases. Definitely the best use is on Void Fiend. Crit charges the corruption meter very quickly, so that alone is nice, but there's a bug/exploit you can do when in corrupted mode to make this last longer than the regular 8 seconds. If you use this equipment and then hold down your primary, the game will recognize that as one attack. So as long as you never let go of the attack button, the game actually won't check to see if you still have it up. You are very limited, you can't sprint or use any of your other abilities, but you can jump and move around. But as long as you're consistently hitting enemies, your corruption meter will never run out and you'll do so much damage. You can do a similar thing with Captain's Diablo Strike. As long as you have it up when you activate the attack, it will still crit even though it doesn't do its damage until long after the equipment has stopped working. If you have a Shattersplane, you can use it to get a bunch of bleed stacks in a very short period of time, but generally you have better options available. Double damage for 8 seconds is nice, but you could alternatively use something much better like Capacitor, Saw, Crowdfunder, even a Prion. This equipment also becomes increasingly redundant when you start finding other sources of crit. Short term, this can get you by and is better than nothing, but it's definitely not something you're going to want to stick with for the entirety of your run. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button because my brother-in-law was playing freeze tag and he never got on Frozen. So right now he's in a coma and the only way you can help is by smashing that subscribe button. Thank you kindly. Number 8, Jade Elephant. Gain 500 armor for 5 seconds, and this has a 45-second cooldown. 500 armor translates to 83% damage reduction, which is really good. You can tank pretty much anything with 500 armor. The problem with this equipment is that you have to use it preemptively. I'm not Nostradamus, I don't know when I'm about to take damage. If I knew I was about to take damage, I'd try to move out of the way and not take damage. This is a really high-level equipment. Knowing when you're likely to take large hits of damage takes quite a bit of game sense, unless it's something simple like fall damage or Vagrant Blasts. Most of the time, you're probably not going to have it active when you most need it. I've noticed new players often forget they have it, and it's just kind of tricky to use. 5 seconds is also a really short uptime. The standard for most equipment is 8 seconds. I do really like this equipment in the races, specifically when combined with Roll of Pennies. You can take a bunch of burns and bleed and get a massive payday out of it. But in a normal Monsoon or Eclipse 8 run, it's not something I find myself looking for very often. Number 7, Glowing Meteorite. This lunar equipment darkens the sky and rains meteors, dealing 600% damage to everything for 20 seconds. This item can actually damage you and all of your teammates, and is thus great for trolling your friends in multiplayer matches, but if your goal is to win, this item is a bit of a stinky poo-poo with diarrhea on top. It's decently effective at killing enemies, and if you know what you're doing, it's not that hard to dodge, but you do run the risk of offing yourself every time you use it. This equipment has the longest cooldown in the game at a whopping 140 seconds, and that's what really kills it for me. If it had a shorter cooldown, I'd like it more, but not by much. It has other problems. Apparently, it has a significant damage falloff, meaning it deals less damage to enemies further away. Granted, I read that on the wiki, I'm not 100% sure that's true, I will say it can be kind of interesting to give to an equipment drone since it can use it on a much shorter cooldown, and it will actually end up dealing more damage since drones deal damage based off of the enemy's level and not your own. But this does usually result in the drone Epsteining itself along with all of your other drones. This is the only lunar equipment on this list, all the other ones are pretty good. Tonic especially is nuts, but yeah, cooldown not very cool. Number 6, Gorag's Opus. All allies enter a frenzy for 7 seconds, which increases movement speed by 50% and attack speed by 100% on a 45-second cooldown. Gorag's Opus is to Risk of Rain 2 what Steve Harvey is to Native Americans. Bald. That doesn't make any heckin' sense. What the hell is the matter with you? I mean, it's alright, all of the food groups are here. Speed, attack speed, long cooldowns, minimal value. It really just doesn't do that much for you. Yeah, the movement speed can be pretty beneficial, but it only lasts for 7 seconds and is certainly not something you can consistently rely on. And while having a burst of attack speed can come in handy, at the end of the day, there's just way better alternatives. Now, it definitely gets points for affecting all allies on the team, and for that reason, it's significantly better in multiplayer. It's also really good if you give it to an equipment drone. You can have a lot of uptime that way. It's not something I ever find myself seeking out, but it's not horrible. Number 5, Supermassive Tapeworm. For 8 seconds, you heal 20% of the damage you deal. This usually results in a full heal. Really not much to say about this one. It has a 60-second cooldown, which is a bit much. Unless you're desperate, you really shouldn't be using your equipment slot for healing. Equipment should be primarily used for utility or damage. There's also better options for healing equipment. Gnarled Wood Sprite is probably the best. It only has a 15-second cooldown and works passively. On top of that, you can utilize it with items like Warhorn or Bottled Chaos. You could also get a remote caffeinator, which on top of healing you, opens you up to firework and squid pull-up builds. If you have literally no other healing options, Leech is alright and may save you, but as soon as you find a slug or two, you should be looking to get rid of it. Number 4, Dole. Heals 50% of your max health on a 45-second cooldown. Now, as much as I love Timothy Escamilla and the Dole boys, seriously Dole, I will suck your supermassive leech for a sponsorship. Please get in touch. This equipment besmirches the good name of Dole by being only slightly better than a botched circumcision. It has a lot of the same issues I just talked about with the tapeworm. Healing is not what you should be using your equipment on, and if you want to, there's a lot better options. It does have a slightly shorter cooldown than Leech, but I find it usually provides less value by only being a 50% heal. I'm kind of going off the rails with this one, kind of quirky, kind of crazy. There's just really nothing to talk about here. Kids, eat your Dole, stay away from the Trix. I know they say Trix is for kids, but that's just more horse shit from the media. Trix is for the elderly and Dole is for kids, and don't you forget it. Number 3, the backup. Call in 4 strike drones that last for 25 seconds on a 100-second cooldown. This equipment just really is not it. First and foremost, with a 100-second cooldown, you'd expect it to do something kind of nice, something kind of tasty, or something incredible, you know? But it just doesn't. Really, all that happens is they distract the enemies for a bit and then screw off. The backup is to Risk of Rain 2 what Steve Harvey is to anime conventions. Bald. They don't really do that much damage, like most drones. Now, I will say, this equipment is amazing if you have Colonel Drone Man. That item actually makes drones worthwhile, so in that case, definitely pick it up, and even better if you can give it to an equipment drone. It would probably be lower on the list if not for that. I guess if you're playing Captain, they do get his Microbot passive, but they rarely die anyway, so it doesn't really matter. If you don't have Drone Man, this is a super underwhelming equipment with a really long cooldown. My dear old Bobo would have screamed if he saw it in his day. Number 2, Molotov. Throw 6 Molotovs that ignite enemies for 500% base damage, leaving fire on the floor that deals 200% base damage every second with a 45-second cooldown. Oh my god. This is the only DLC equipment on this list. Power creep is friggin' awesome, what can I say? This equipment is awful in so many ways. 500% damage is nothing, and according to the wiki, that's not even right, and is instead 250% damage. And good luck hitting them since they all spread out in random directions. Even if you do somehow manage to defy Murphy's Law and get all of them to hit, it's hardly anything. For comparison, Royal Capacitor deals 3000% damage on a 20-second cooldown. Molly deals maybe 1200 if you're lucky on a 45-second cooldown. And keep in mind, this damage is spread out, so it's not like you're going to want to proc bans off it. Now what about the fire shit stain? The fire shit stain is surely good, right? No, because it's tiny and they go in random directions, so you can't really aim it unless you look directly at the floor, but if you're doing that, you're probably not going to hit anything anyway. Even with multiple stacks of ignition tanks, an item that increases fire damage, it won't do very much. The kind of positive thing I can say is the cooldown isn't unbearable like the backup, but at least that equipment is good in some situations. I can't say the same for Molly. There's no situation this equipment is desirable, and for that reason, it's number 2. Few honorable mentions today. First and foremost, the aspects. I didn't include them on the list because they would have dominated the top 5, and they're not even really equipment, they're just passive items that take up an equipment slot. The perfected, overloading, and blazing aspects are all really good and are definitely worth picking up, but the malachite one is pretty bad, and the celestine and glacial aspects are literally just chronobaubles that take up an equipment slot. They're god-awful. But probably the worst one is the mending aspect. This thing is horrible. You can heal allies and drop a healing core when you die. Great. It's barely any healing, and you can't even use it on engineers' turrets. Maybe it's better in multiplayer, but I don't have any friends, so I'm not considering that. Another honorable mention is fuel array. You die when you drop below 50% health. Didn't feel right to include it, but it is pretty bad. Also, the consume tricorn. The description literally just says, looks kinda cool, but that's about it. Need I say more? But excluding all of those, I think the worst equipment in the game is radar scanner. Reveal all interactables for 10 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. I don't care what Markiplier says, this thing sucks ass. I guess it does speed up your game slightly, but you can get basically the same effect by using your eyeballs. I'd like it more if it had more icons, but it reuses the same icon over and over and over. So for example, chests, equipment barrels, radio scanners, 3D printers, fans, the broken wrecks and abyssal depths, scavenger sack, void cradles, and void potentials are all marked with the chest icon. Even in the niche cases where you'd want it, it does a shitty job of giving you information. Feels like they got kinda lazy with this one. If everything had a different icon, this would actually be really good and useful for speedruns, but as it is, it just doesn't tell you that much, and having a 45-second cooldown on top of that just makes it even worse. Unless you're looping and just want to save a little bit of time looting, I don't really know why you'd want this. Even if you are looping, there's so many better alternatives, like a card or a recycler, and for that reason, this equipment is the worst in the game. As always, these lists are not to be taken too seriously. I think that's especially true when talking about equipment because they are designed to work around different builds. One of the consequences of not having an intro is I don't really get to express that idea as much as I'd like to, but it's true, these videos do not reflect actual gameplay scenarios, they're just kind of a way for me to express my thoughts on why I like/dislike certain things. I do want to take a second to say thank you guys for all the support. The channel has grown so much in the last couple months, to an extent I didn't even think was possible, considering it's been over a year since the last content update. Just know I don't take it for granted, and I'm incredibly honored to be in this position. And an extra special thank you to my members. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Ta-ta for now.